The film opens with a young girl who meets up with an old man at a public park. As the girl gives her consent, the old man begins exposing the 7 deadly sins that humankind commits. Discussing the first sin, greed, the old man adds that people show greed for things they cannot have. He then takes the girl's hand and takes her on a journey to visit the 7 stories of the sinners. The first story is about the sin greed, which opens with a woman named Allie. She is hosting a party at her place where she has gathered her family and friends to announce that she has won a huge lottery. Once the party is over, Allie and her friend Kate go down to the basement and give a plate of food to the horribly scarred woman whom they've chained up in their basement. It turns out the woman is gifted with the tool of sorcery through which she can grant people's wishes. Allie's lottery ticket is also no coincidence, but the sorcerer's magic that granted her wish. Now that Allie's wish has been fulfilled, Kate asks for her wish to be fulfilled. She wants to become a mother without coming in contact with a man. The sorcerer denies impregnating her, claiming she doesn't want to bring chaos to the world by creating a life. Hearing this, the girls demand for the sorcerer to impregnate Katie or else they'll chop her head off. Out of options, the sorcerer agrees and requests of a list full of herbal ingredients. When Kate asks Allie how she's managed to avail the blood, subsequently, the sorcerer mixes the herbs with blood and smears the paste all over Kate's bare belly. As the sorcerer chants in another language and strokes Kate's belly, they hear someone walking upstairs. When Allie goes upstairs to see who has barged into her home, the sorcerer claims that Kate has successfully been impregnated. Meanwhile, Allie goes upstairs and finds her cousin, Ben, walking into her home without her consent. Ben indirectly reveals his need to borrow money, which Allie doesn't like. Back in the basement, Kate leaves the sorcerer unsupervised where she rips off a thick hair strand from her head and bites her arm to take out some of her blood. She then mixes her hair and blood into the bowl in which she had made the herb paste. As she chants some spells and squeezes the blooded hair strand in her hand, Kate bleeds her uterus out and perishes. When Allie gets back inside the home, she is horrified to see Kate lifeless on the floor. She runs to the basement to take revenge on the sorcerer, but the sorcerer reminds Allie of the consequences that she warned them about. Allie doesn't listen to the woman and attacks her instead. The sorcerer picks up the bowl in which she had mixed the herbs and blood and smacks Allie's head with it. Allie still manages to overpower the sorcerer and choke her lifeless. Surprisingly, Ben shows up and whacks Allie's head with the wooden side of an axe. The sorcerer thanks him and wishes to be untied, but Ben sees the ritual stuff around her and realizes she has helped Allie win the lottery. Instead of helping the poor woman, he becomes greedy and asks the woman to grant his wishes too. This brings the story back to the old man and the little girl. She asks the old man about not punishing Ben despite him being greedy too, while still staying a mystery. The old man describes himself as a vessel that can only transition a man from one place to another rather than taking their life. The old man then moves on toward the second sin, which is gluttony. He speaks of the kind that overindulges itself with things that it shouldn't. The second story about committing the sin of gluttony rolls. A chubby man named Jay is seen begging for a second chance from his girl, Kate, on the phone in the middle of a haunting road. Suddenly, a man approaches his car and attacks him. He regains consciousness with a concussion and a blurry memory. Sitting in front of him is Mrs. Hilda, a lunatic old hag. She tries to jog Jay's memory while he's tied up on a stool. While she speaks in her firm tone, her younger brother, George, shows up and chops off some meat from Jay's legs. Stuck in a dire situation, Jay has no option but to scream at the top of his lungs. Hilda tapes Jay's mouth when he faints. When he regains consciousness once again, he finds Hilda eating his meat, which is cooked and presented to her in a plate. Without being asked, Hilda starts blabbering about her father, who also used to skin people alive when she and George were young. Her family faced starvation for months, leading them to adopt a survival instinct according to which they differentiate humans into 2 categories, with one being the prey and the other being the one that preys. While justifying her cannibalism as a survival instinct of hers, she picks up a crowbar and goes near Jay to hit him with it. Unbeknownst to the old hag, Jay had worked on untying his hands that were roped in the back of the stool. When she comes closer to attack him, Jay hits her with his bare hands and runs out of the psychotic place. Once he is out, he catches a glimpse of Hilda's brother cutting the wood logs and carefully sneaks into the woods. Since Hilda and her brother cut and cooked one of Jay's calves, he is having trouble walking. He limps on one foot and reaches a point in the woods where he sees his girlfriend, Kate, tied up to a wooden structure. When he goes near her, he finds her in terrible condition. He immediately unties her and tries to flee with her, but Hilda's brother shows up and catches them, putting an end to the story of gluttony. The scene cuts back to the old man and the little girl, who raises a few questions about the gluttony story. While walking on the fountain boundary walls, she notices a couple talking. The old man observes this and pauses time by thudding his umbrella on the floor. He takes the little girl closer to the couple to observe them. As they take a closer look at the jammed couple, the old man announces the next sin, which is sloth. He states that staying unmotivated and not caring about the world, its people, or oneself, can often lead to committing the sin of sloth. Sloth not only takes over one's mind, but it sabotages their body and its entire functioning. Before taking the little girl to the next story, he advises her to not observe too much, since the observation can affect the observer. Following this, the old man takes the little girl into the story of a movie director who has recruited Steve, Jamie, and Kayla as his actors and crew. He is a newbie who is having trouble shooting his film and cooperating with the people he's working with, since all of them are consumed by sloth. According to the plot of that director's film, Steve is supposed to hear his door get knocked on. He is to get up and check up on the door. When he doesn't find anyone standing, he is supposed to hear the footsteps of someone walking upstairs. He is then supposed to go upstairs to a room and open the closet to find a murder clown hiding inside it with a gun. Sadly, the director gets mad to see Jamie, the clown, texting on his phone instead of staying prepared for his scene. He cuts the scene and singles him out. Then he writes another scene while trying to tolerate the unprofessional behavior. He gets the next scene ready, where Steve has to come to the doorway, but he finds Steve lying on the couch instead, using his phone. The director politely reminds him to act professional, but it seems like Jamie and Steve are too laid back to adapt to change. The director singles them out once again and rewrites the entire scene. He comes back and fixes Jamie's costume malfunction, telling him he looks great now. Jamie laughs and criticizes how horrible the clown suit is. The director experiences a silent meltdown. Then, he gathers Jamie, Steve, and Kayla the mic lady and hesitantly requests that they respect the nature of work and be professional. Amidst his intervention speech, Steve receives a random call. He answers it and starts discussing random stuff with the person on the other end. The director slowly slips out of his sanity as he keeps seeing the misconduct and stubbornness of his cast. However, he bottles up his aggression and prepares for another scene. In this scene, Steve has to run to the kitchen in panic, and Jamie has to follow him and shoot him in the chest with his gun. For some reason, Kayla keeps lowering the mic, which shows up in the camera frame again and again, due to which they have to retake the scenes. However, finally, when Kayla doesn't lower her mic in the third cut, Jamie and Steve mess up their line and fail to bring reality into the scene. This time, the director loses his nerve and tells them to take a break. In the meantime, he loads Jamie's gun with real bullets and hands it back to him. When the 5-minute break is over, the director commences the scene, only this time, Jamie shoots Steve for real and he struggles for his life, which brings intensity and perfection to the scene, pleasing the director. By the time Kayla and Jamie realize what the director has done to them, the director becomes the manifestation of a real clown and holds his cast and crew hostage. He tapes their mouths and ties them to a chair. Despite their mouths being taped shut, he forces them to react to his words and shoot another scene with him. He also lectures them on how their laziness led him to do all this. Before starting the scene, he smacks Kayla's head open with a baseball bat, while stating she had to be put down since she isn't in the movie. He then improvises the scene by becoming the murder joker. The improvising makes him realize that the real Steve has no business being in his movie since he's cast out of the film, so he smacks his head open with a baseball bat too. He finally rolls the camera and goes behind the curtains to start the scene. He makes his entrance from behind the curtain and delivers a corny dialogue before shooting Jamie in the chest. Strangely, he becomes so obsessed with his film achieving perfection, so he throws his gun at Jamie and tells him to shoot him in return. Grunting and crying in pain, Jamie takes the gun and shoots the crazy director, which puts an end to the story. Now, back in the park, the little girl points out some stuff from the story that she didn't find right, but the wise old man gives justifications to end her doubts. He then leaps to the next sin, which is lust. According to the old man, out of all the sins, lust is the worst one since it perverts God's greatest gift, love, into fornication, adultery. With that being said, the old man holds the little girl's hand and takes her into the story of a guy named Tim who finds his victims through an online dating app and misuses the concept of love. In the opening act, a girl named Cassandra matches herself up with Tim on the dating app, thinking he's cute. She meets up with him at a loud bar where Tim pretends to act nervous and lets her dominate him with her flirting skills. Cassandra takes him out of the bar and into her home. She teases Tim by slowly stripping her clothes off. As she gets on top of him and bounces for a few seconds, Tim's tail, with a pointy arrow at the end, slithers out of the blanket and stabs Cassandra's back, which ultimately takes her life. Subsequently, Tim matches himself up with everyone he sees on his dating app regardless of gender or age. Soon, the profiles of his victims start appearing inactive, hinting that he's hunting his victims down one by one. One day, he takes his date out of the bar and leads her to the dumpster area. The girl points out that Tim was going to take her back to his car, but since there is no car in sight, she asks if she should be worried. Tim laughs and tries to joke about the situation, but the girl's instincts kick in, and she smacks Tim's nose using her elbow. She then confesses that she knows what he's been doing to all the people he's been meeting up through the dating app. She takes out a sharp wooden weapon and stabs his heart with it. Tim pretends to fall down and act affected, but he gets up while bleeding from his mouth and heart. Then, he starts laughing. The shocked girl starts assuming Tim is a vampire, but Tim clarifies that he's an incubus, a male demon who's supposed to have intercourse with women. This statement provokes the girl to continue attacking him using her strong fighting skills. She throws punches at him and tries to find out a way to take his life, but Tim's tail does the work for him. It slips out of his pants and stabs the girl to her demise. This incident makes him realize that he has started attracting threats toward him. However, he ignores it and continues to match himself up with more people on the app who start becoming inactive after a while. Tim's final encounter is with a girl who calls herself Aphrodite on the dating app. While bouncing on top of Tim, she bores him by discussing the tales of Batman and how he is considered the smartest detective. When Tim uses his pointy tail to take her life, the woman shows no reaction and keeps bouncing on him, only making Tim uncomfortable. Suddenly, she emits a strong light from her body and slowly starts sucking Tim's soul. Tim tries to choke her with his hands, but she overpowers him and succeeds in sucking his life out of him. The scene then cuts back to the girl and her old pal in the park, where the girl is seen lying down beside him and demanding to be shown the next sin. The old man hints at corruptness and absolute selfishness. The girl picks up the hint and guesses pride as the next sin. The old man nods and mentions she's precisely right about the guess, while pointing out some of the characteristics of the people who are drowned in pride. The story of a man named Mike begins. Mike's bicycle breaks down on a walking track that's in the woods. There, a girl named Veronica, who's jogging on the same track, stops by to check up on him. Mike introduces himself to her and asks for her help, requesting for her to walk to the end of the path with him. While the two are walking, a mysterious figure lurks in the back of the bushes, keeping an eye on Mike and Veronica. Later that night, he goes home to his morbidly obese friend named Matt, who has a Bill Cosby mask on. While Mike rolls his he mentions Veronica being the one for him. Matt, who's focused on his video game, laughs about it and reminds him of his pattern with the past 15 or 16 girls he's already been with. Along with that, he also warns him to stop what he's doing before he gets caught. When Mike thinks he will never get caught due to his genius ideas, Matt points out the names of some serial killers who were most definitely exposed for their inhuman crimes. Matt's warning indicates that Mike may be one of the corrupt ones. Feeling the need to smoke, Matt goes out of the house. Outside, he finds the garage shutter wide open, so he goes to close it. Matt doesn't realize there's a psycho murderer waiting for him in the dark. He slices Matt's throat with a sharp knife and tries to drag him back into the garage. However, Matt turns out to be too heavy to be dragged, so the murderer takes out an axe to cut him into pieces. Mike, on the other hand, is prepping his meal. While chaffing the carrots, he makes fun of Matt's obesity, claiming he's never eaten a carrot in his life. Suddenly, the power gets cut. Mike thinks he's angered Matt with his joke, which is why he cut out the power. Hence, he yells at Matt to turn the power back on. But little does he know what's awaiting him. While he's upstairs, the masked murderer enters his home. Out of frustration, Mike turns on his phone's flashlight and walks out of the house to switch the power circuit back on. Outside, he sees a puddle of blood and realizes something's wrong. Without having any time to investigate the mystery, the murderer strangles Mike from behind with a piece of cord. After a long struggle to free himself and fight back, Mike meets his end. While not lifting his mask, the murderer then walks toward the shed and frees Veronica, who has her mouth taped shut and her entire body tied up with ropes. The ending reveals that the murderer was actually a savior who put an end to Mike the maniac. The scene once again cuts back to the old man and the little girl at the park. This time, the girl doesn't question the story. She calls the next sin envy and asks the old man to shed light on it. He replies to the girl, saying envious people are those who wish to possess other people's stuff and happiness. If they can get what they want, they don't let the other person have it either. The old man begins the story with a psychotic girl named Liv, who has a lifeless fetus inside her. Currently living alone, Liv sobs and cries every day, knowing that her husband is gone and she can no longer have kids after her abortion. One day, her sister, Brooke, shows up at her place and tries to convince her to come back and live with her family. She also unintentionally tries to make Liv realize that she should get the lifeless fetus removed. But Liv raises her voice at her, thinking Brooke wants to sabotage her motherhood. Brooke is understanding of her, so she doesn't make a scene. She only requests for Liv to show up at their parents' home for dinner at night. Liv agrees to the invitation and hugs her sister, grateful towards her for supporting her in her bad times. Before visiting her parents, Liv meets a therapist who also claims to be spiritualist and a healer. The spiritualist guesses that Liv has gone through a tragic event in her life, but she cannot tell what. To find out, she requires Liv to hold her hands. But she notices Liv zoning out and scratching herself so viciously that her arm starts to bleed. The woman stops Liv's bad habit and grabs her hands. She immediately pulls her hands back, claiming that Liv was visited by an extraterrestrial entity the night she conceived her baby. According to her, such entities target pregnant women and take host of their bodies and their fetuses. The spiritualist claims that her fetus has not perished, but is consumed by the entity. She suggests getting it removed before it consumes Liv too. However, Liv thinks the woman is crazy and walks out of her place. When Liv arrives at her parents' house, her mother announces that Brooke is pregnant with her boyfriend. Liv becomes envious and makes some rude remarks. However, before Brooke can defend herself, Liv starts gagging and runs to the bathroom. When Brooke goes after her, Liv stabs her belly with a pair of scissors and accuses her of poisoning her so that her baby could be a Brooke could have hers. Brooke perishes, explaining her innocence. When Brooke's boyfriend hears the noise, he tries to go and help the sisters, but the parents smirk and slice his throat open. Soon, the entity starts consuming Liv's body. Her skin, hair, and nails start coming off, revealing her flesh. At that time, Liv's demonic parents are seen standing by the door with the mysterious being. When Liv asks for their help, they tell her to go through with her pain since a new life is arriving through her. The story ends there. When the scene shifts to the old man and the little girl, it is indicated that they are the ones who are delivering all the sinners in the stories from evil, and the little girl would question every time someone wasn't served judgment. In Liv's story, the little girl points out the entity that did wrong wasn't punished for it. The old man reminds her that their duty is to sentient beings only, and entities like the one in the story will be collected when their time comes. Then, the old man talks about the final sin, wrath. In this story, a guilty man named Jacob confesses living with unwanted hate in group therapy. His therapist validates his feelings and advises him to suppress his anger. As the story progresses, Jacob is seen living with a haunted vision of his son, Isaac, who's wearing a mask and keeps asking Jacob to look at him. Every time Jacob sees the vision, he stretches an elastic band on his wrist to get him back to his senses. One day, he goes out with his therapy counselor for a drink and talks about the disturbing vision. He advises Jacob to confront his demons to end his guilt. The counselor asks Jacob about a mass shooting at a school and asks for his kid's name. When Jacob asks the old man who he lost in the shooting, the man vanishes, revealing that Jacob had formed the entire therapy group and the counselor in his head. Jacob recalls the event when he didn't let his son pick the college he wanted to attend, which resulted in Isaac committing a mass shooting at his school, and later taking his with a gun. At the end of this story, Jacob faces Isaac's ghost and asks for forgiveness. Isaac forgives Jacob and stops haunting him. Jacob then goes to his wife and makes up with her, becoming free from guilt. The film ends with the old man telling the little girl about his flaws. He admits his guilt of keeping his knowledge to himself. Moving past his regrets, he finds out that it's the little girl's first time, so he asks her to repeat what's her duty, to which the little girl says, to help the lost find their way.